This week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, with agriculture broadcaster Orion Samuelson and yours truly, Max Armstrong, and featuring agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier. This week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone.
After more than a year of delay, EPA provides some certainty to the biofuels industry. Thanks for joining us here on This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson. In the studio this week, Max Armstrong will be along a little bit later in the program. But first, we finally had some movement from the Environmental Protection Agency on their release of the renewable volume obligations for the biofuel industry. These are the RVOs. And joining us today to talk about it is Jeff Cooper, the president and CEO of the Renewable Fuels Association. Jeff, thanks for joining us. And if you would, tell us, what are these RVOs and why do they matter?
Sure, and thanks for having me this morning, Mike. And RVOs are essentially the annual rule that EPA publishes. You might remember that Congress back in 2007 passed a law that established the renewable fuel standard. And as part of that law, it required EPA every year to set standards that actually require specific volumes of renewable fuels to be blended into gasoline and diesel. So EPA is supposed to set these standards every single year. Every November, they are supposed to publish the numbers for the following year. And you're right, we've been waiting a very long time, more than a year, for the 2021 standards, and EPA finally proposed those this week, along with lots of other material that we're still digesting.
Well, let's talk about the RVO proposal. We had numbers for 2020, which is interesting, 2021 and 2022. Jeff, how do these numbers look in the context of the biofuels industry?
Yeah, well, there's really good news and bad news in these numbers, Mike. The 2022 number we're excited about, and we're very optimistic that EPA is finally getting the renewable fuel standard back on track in 2022. They are proposing a volume requirement of 15 billion gallons for conventional renewable fuels like corn ethanol. And that is the number that Congress intended and specified when they wrote the law back in 2007. And in addition to that 15 billion gallons, EPA is requiring a supplemental requirement of another 250 million gallons in 2022 to make up for some illegally waived volume back in 2016. So 2022 is good news. 2021, again, it's December and they're finally proposing these volumes. The approach they're taking is, well, we're essentially going to require refiners to blend what they actually blended and just base the RVO on actual consumption. We do have some concerns with that approach, and we're not quite sure that they're getting it right. But then the real bad news is what EPA is proposing to do with 2020. And EPA actually had finalized the 2020 standards on time back in November of 2019. And they published those volumes and the market reacted to them. And now, 2 years later, they're coming back and saying they want to retroactively reduce the 2020 volume because of COVID and the impacts that it had on the marketplace. And we see that as completely unnecessary and totally unprecedented. EPA has never done anything quite like that before. And we don't think it's legally permissible. So we're taking a really hard look at that 2020 number.
So you would expect to see some legal challenges to that 2020 number in the courts?
Yeah, I think we will. Again, these are proposed numbers at this point. But if that's the approach that EPA finalizes, I would expect to see some legal challenge to that action if they do follow through with that.
Now, one of the other pieces of information was they addressed the small refinery exemption waivers that had been fairly prolific during the last administration. Jeff, what are they going to do with these?
Yeah, well, there were 65 pending small refinery exemption petitions, and under the law, small refineries do have the ability to ask for an exemption or be excused from their renewable fuel blending requirements. Only under very specific circumstances are they allowed to have those exemptions. Under the previous administration, EPA was giving exemptions to every small refinery that asked for one. This EPA, in this package this week, came out and said they are going to deny each and every one of those 65 pending small refinery exemption petitions. And we see that as great news. We think it's consistent with some recent court decisions and again, helps get the RFS back on track. if they had given those 65 exemptions, I mean, we're talking about 3 billion gallons, give or take, of renewable fuel blending that would have been excused. And so we're very happy to see EPA requiring refiners to comply with that, again, roughly 3 billion gallons of blending requirements.
And there was also a release in conjunction with the EPA from the USDA awarding $800 million to the industry. Jeff, is the industry ready to put that money to use?
The industry is absolutely ready to receive that funding. It's meant to be COVID relief funding, and that was promised to the industry more than a year ago. So very happy to see that $700 million come through from USDA, along with $100 million in biofuels infrastructure funding. So good news from USDA yesterday.
All right, bit of a mixed bag. Jeff Cooper, President and CEO of the Renewable Fuels Association, thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks, Mike.
This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by AgriGold, your seed ally in the field, with unparalleled options that perform on your farm. Learn more at agrigold.com. It's time to talk markets, and that release from the EPA wasn't the only government release being watched by commodities traders this week. We also had a supply and demand estimate come out of the USDA. Joining me to help break it down this weekend is Clayton Pope of Clayton Pope Commodities. Did you see anything terribly surprising on the corn side of that supply and demand estimate from USDA?
Well, Mike, I think the biggest surprise in the corn number was the fact that they didn't change anything. I think if you look at the numbers to date as far as the ethanol, corn for ethanol demand item, there's every reason to think they probably would raise that a little bit. I mean, these ethanol margins are through the roof. Even though they backed off a little bit the last couple of weeks, it's still extremely profitable. Those weekly numbers continue to impress. We're running ahead of the needed schedule, to hit the projected numbers. So a lot of people thought they would increase that by maybe 25, possibly 50 million bushels, but they left it the same. So as volatile as that crude oil market is right now, and the whole COVID thing, so there's a big question mark about miles driven and all that kind of thing. So I can see where they're coming from, leave it unchanged, but that was the biggest surprise, I think.
That was surprising. And as you take a look at exports, I mean, that's one of those things where we've gotten really excited about the future for corn exports, but we haven't quite delivered. Do you anticipate seeing an increase in exports in 2022?
Boy, that's the million-dollar question. If you had asked me a couple of months ago, I would have thought absolutely yes. When you were coming off the heels of that horrible Brazilian crop last year. But on the other hand, it seems China's doing everything they can to not buy from us. They keep buying Ukraine corn, which is much more expensive than us on the world market. So there's no question it's an intentional snub, I guess, for lack of a better word. And that being the case, I mean, they're the ones who have to step forward, I think, if we are going to raise that number. Or you see a real problem with Brazil's production later on down the road. But so far, it's looking okay.
All right. On the Chinese demand side, that phase one deal is coming to an end. Do you think China is going to be aggressively looking for other suppliers around the world now that they're not supposed to be buying from the U.S. anymore?
I think they are behind the scenes, to tell you the truth. I kind of have a negative attitude on the whole phase one thing. I mean, let's face it, back then we were as sick of seeing phase one in the headlines as we are seeing COVID now. I mean, come on, enough's enough. But, phase one, it was a bust. I mean, they didn't meet what they promised they'd do and running behind. And now they're I think, clearly looking the other way from us. So, are we going to have some talks? I'm sure we will. But, it's like phooey. I'm not going to lose any sleep over whether or not they're going to have a talk. And even if they agree to something, I don't think it means anything. Yeah. They will buy what they need to buy from whoever they want to get it from. And as of right now, we're not number one on the list.
All right. Looking over at the wheat market, Clayton, there has been a compelling bull story developing in the wheat complex for some time. With the tensions currently between Russia and the Ukraine, could wheat really start to move here in the new year?
That is the million-dollar item right there. I mean, that could be huge. But if you take that out of the equation, frankly, I think this whole wheat market has really been overdone to the upside. And as you know, recently we've seen a really pretty violent pullback in the wheat market, dip below the 50-day average in response to that report. Actually, just before the report, it was below the 50-day and still is. But obviously, that would be such a game changer. You can't really calculate what it would do. I mean, we've seen skirmishes over there before, a lot of saber rattling or worse. It's obviously in everybody's interest to keep that whole Black Sea flow going, but it doesn't mean you would see an immediate pump up in just the risk premium. There's no doubt about that. But Frankly, I mean, who knows what's going on behind the scenes with these world leaders? I can't imagine Putin would go in there and do it, but he's up to something, and I wouldn't want to bet the farm betting that he won't do something.
That's a good point. We'll have more market discussion with Clayton Pope when we return. Welcome back. We're talking markets with Clayton Pope of Clayton Pope Commodities. And Clayton, we were speaking about the wheat market just briefly, and you mentioned that you were thinking it was a little bit overdone. What are the downside reasons you're looking at that make you think this market might be a little toppy?
Well, it's funny because wheat has always been in a different world in terms of how you look at its stocks to usage ratio. I mean, it towers above corn and soybeans stocks to usage ratio, but it's all relative. So even though a year or two, stocks to usage is maybe 50%. Now it's come down to whatever it is, 35% or something, but it's still 3 or 4 times what corn and beans are. But it's all relative. It is tighter than it used to be, and I think the fact that it's a people food more than a livestock food, I think definitely adds another degree of severity or importance to it too. So it's very sensitive to slight changes. That being the case, that's been the battle cry of the bulls. That it's getting tight. The world exportable stocks are at record low and that kind of thing. And I have no argument with any of that. It's just that none of that has translated so far into an increase in U.S. exports. And until it does, I can't get excited about it. And even on Thursday's supply and demand, USDA lowered wheat exports by another 20 million bushels. Even before they did that, the last 8 weeks of export inspections have run behind the needed pace to hit the USDA projection before they adjusted it. Okay, in the October numbers that just came out was the lowest wheat export number since before 1972, the great grain robbery year. So add it all together, and it's like, do we really need wheat to rally? I don't think so. Of course, you've got the HRW problem. The condition reports are coming in below average, but come on, it's mid-December. How many times do you kill a wheat crop, and then lo and behold, the spring comes, hey, that's looking pretty good.
It turns out okay.
I don't know. I can't get bulled up on wheat. But obviously the wild card, which would be, like I said, a giant game changer, which almost hard to calculate, would be if Russia gets aggressive there. And if that's the case, maybe if you're going to get aggressively short, I probably have some safety calls out of the money just to protect you from that probably unlikely event, but certainly possible.
Well, let's talk soybeans. We did have some modest changes to soybeans in the supply and demand estimates report. Can you bring us up to speed?
Well, the U.S. numbers, I believe, are unchanged, but the world numbers, I was kind of surprised. They dropped the carryover by something like 2 million metric tons, and I thought, where the heck did that come from? So the first place I looked was Argentina and Brazil's production. They left those unchanged, which are pretty high, and CONAB just raised their numbers Thursday morning as well, so they're not too concerned about the La Nina drought in southern Brazil, which I thought was very interesting. They're still slightly below USDA, but they're way up there. It's a record number for both corn and beans. But where it came from really was a drop in China production of soybeans. They dropped like 2.7 million metric tons, I think. But they're a small player. It went from 19 million metric tons to 16.3, I believe. So even though it's kind of a surprise cut in the big picture, 2.5 million metric tons isn't enough to get real excited about. And apparently the market wasn't too excited either.
Well, they did have quite a bit of verbiage in the report about soybean oil. That demand has been very strong for the past year. They anticipated it to continue, but they didn't change any of their numbers for bean oil. They said we're going to extract more from the existing beans we've got. Do you think this bean oil can continue to carry the soybean market?
Short term, no. Bean oil has had a real collapse. It looked like it was gold, a couple months ago, but it's really gotten hit hard. You look at the biodiesel mandates and so forth. I think people are disappointed in the short-term stuff, but the long-term, the 2022, is still bullish. I mean, this country, like it or not, is really headed towards, really pushing the levers towards more and more biodiesel usage. So long-term, it's hard to be bearish bean oil, and therefore it'll help beans.
All right, lots to think about. Clayton Pope of Clayton Pope Commodities.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform, combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
Last week, tech guru Chad Colby joined us in the studio to talk about his Christmas gift guide. There's a lot of stuff on there, and this week he's got a recap in case you missed anything.
With the success of our holiday gift ideas, we thought we might want to do a recap for you. So a couple great drone kits from Flying Ag starting at under $800. These are amazing drones that'll work well on your farm or ranch here in the upcoming season, including that new Mavic 3, which is a powerhouse drone. Also, we talked about some tools. Milwaukee had a couple things I just had to buy, so I threw them in the holiday segment. That new Impact and that great 3/8 socket set, something you can never go wrong. Tablets, you got to remember Apple made some big updates here recently. That new entry-level iPad at just over $300. I think there's a couple of those coming for the Colby girls this year. I love the light band lights. They start at about $40 and go up. What a handy tool. Check out their website. They've got a bunch of different models and brightnesses. They're really nice. And kind of the talk of Christmas has been, how can we make our pickup trucks, tractors, and semis look good? You look at this picture on the right, that old boxcar Magnum, that's a one-step process with tools like this, and they work so good. TNT Systems has done a great job putting together these professional tools and products that we can use in agriculture, including all their coatings. Now, we've talked about them a little bit here in the last year. It's such a game changer in agriculture where you can take some tired, old-looking equipment and make it look, honestly, better than new. Technology like this is what I really like to share, something we've just never seen before. I hope you've enjoyed the holiday segment this year. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. As you would expect, I've had a lot the last couple weeks. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
Thank you, Chad. And he also had some books on his gift guide this year we didn't have a chance to get to. Agriculture's Air Force, a 100-year history of agriculture aviation. If you enjoy seeing those spray planes flying overhead, you'll enjoy reading about their history. He also sent along An Industry Worth Fighting For, Derek Josie's story, an Oregon dairy farmer battling against agricultural and environmental extremists. Thank you, Chad, for those Christmas gift ideas. Later in the program, we'll get an update from the Iowa Farm Bureau annual meeting.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Well, we've been offering here on the broadcast some ideas for holiday gift giving. Mr. Colby rises to the occasion every year, but I want to circle back and talk about some things, especially for those of you who love tractors. And that includes so many of you in our This Week in Agribusiness audience. Respected author and photographer Lee Clouncher joins us here to talk about some of the offerings from his shop, Octane Press. The website, octanepress.com. Wanted to get that right out there at the outset, Lee. We should point out, while much of your fame has been built around red tractors and red combines, red equipment, you have a green book this year.
I do. As you like to say, I'm bipartisan, Max. So absolutely, we got a new book on John Deere. It's been 10 years in the works, and we did a lot of digging. And I think people that enjoy the red books will also enjoy this one because there's so much of the same kind of things. Lots of stories from engineers about how these machines came to be, behind the scenes things you wouldn't read anywhere else. And of course, beautiful photography. That's something I always work hard on.
Your photography, of course, is a hallmark of your work, but I think all of us who have had Lee Clouncher books and take pride in ownership of them and displaying them, as many of us do, also respect the editorial content. You do extensive research in your books.
Absolutely. And one of the things I really believe is the books need to be fresh. They need to have something you haven't read elsewhere. So in this book, for example, you'll learn about the rotary engine Deere project, a project they did in the 80s. They actually bought the Wankel engine and built a running prototype. And the engineers who did that told us that story. It's terrific. We also have some really fun stuff if you're a red enthusiast. If you remember, there was a harvester salesman who snuck into the introduction of one of John Deere's tractors done down at the Superdome. He told his story in Red Four-Wheel Drive Tractors. The John Deere guys came back for this book, came to us and said, hey, we were there, and told the John Deere side of the story, which is also very funny and entertaining. just the kind of shenanigans that went on in the competition between red and green. So this book will give you perspective on that battle between those two makers.
In that period of such intense competition, which of course exists yet today among tractor equipment companies, they would do some interesting things. I mean, they'd move equipment under tarps, they'd move them under the cover of darkness, they would go into remote areas of the country if they could, as I recall, to try to keep secret that next product that was going to be coming out there. And I know you've captured a lot of that in your books. Help me understand, is this about the same size as the books on international harvester equipment, same dimensions and weight?
It is. It's, in fact, I have a copy here. It is a little bit taller and a little bit narrower. So it's a slightly different trim. Page count is the same. It's 350 pages. It's another 7-pound beast for people to get a workout.
I tell people they have to be careful with it. I mean, if you take that to bed and you're lying there looking up at it and you start to drift off, you could get hurt with that thing. It's a wonderful volume and people really enjoy it. I would be remiss if I didn't point out, though, that you also have addressed the Caterpillar brand in some of your work.
Absolutely. That's something we've been working on for a while, and we have a Caterpillar calendar this year. We also have a new Caterpillar coloring book for people that like those machines. And that's one of the really cool things Caterpillar has is these prototype drawings that they've saved in their archives. And they have a wonderful archive, and their archivist is fabulous. And he showed me some of these a few years back. So the coloring book, actually the last few drawings are from the future, and they're just fantastic. So I think for that particular book, if you really love cat equipment or you love seeing prototypes and interesting things, it's really a neat, detailed book.
You have many other books as well for the, quote, gearheads, if I may call them that. But I want to point out quickly, too, that you and your crew were at the Half Century of Progress back in the summer and produced the Half Century of Progress video this year. It's a very fine product.
We did. And I have to say, on a personal level, that was just a fantastic project. To do storytelling in a video form we had just a fantastic crew, really talented videographers. That's not my bag. I can take a still photo, but video is another thing. And working on that and trying to capture some of the drama and the stories around that was really, really enjoyable. And I really think in the Half Century DVD, the stories that came out from people about how the show came to be and how things kind of evolved. There's just some great stories that if you love that show, in addition to seeing the equipment working, you're going to learn some great stories about behind the scenes of the show.
There are great shows all over America for tractor clubs and tractor collectors, and I think folks who have their own shows can really appreciate all of the work that goes into this one in particular. All of your products, by the way, are at octanepress.com, correct?
Absolutely. And I would like to add, we do have a new version of Red Combines this year, which is an important book. It's real nice to hold them in your hands. If you fall asleep with it, you won't break your arm, as you brought up.
We appreciate the visit as always, sir. Thank you. You'll make some of the holiday season happenings happier for some of the folks that we know. Certainly, they'll be glad to have gifts from Octane Press. Good to talk to you, Lee.
Thank you so much for having me on, Max. Always a pleasure.
Lee Cloutcher. His company is Octane Press, the website octanepress.com. There's more coming up on this weekend's This Week in Agribusiness. This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Farm meeting season is getting underway, and last week I had the chance to attend the Iowa Farm Bureau annual meeting. While there, I spoke with a lot of growers. There was a lot of optimism, but there was some concern for the future, and I talked with Dr. Sam Funk about fertilizer availability as we head into this spring.
You know, locking in fertilizer is always a question because if you haven't already applied it, it doesn't mean that you're going to have it. So there are some brokers that we've had reports of who probably overcommitted for what allocations that they were going to have going into this planting season for FY 2022. So that's going to be a very difficult situation for a lot of producers, not just in Iowa and across the United States, but even to other primary growing areas like in Brazil. So you're seeing a lot of pressure globally on that aspect. So there's competition to get those inputs. As we look at some of the prices and how high that we've seen nitrogen fertilizers go, we're talking about producers that may be paying upwards of 80 cents a bushel for the nitrogen they're going to have for next year versus it was 35 cents last year. So that's a big difference in changes that we've seen increased in prices, and it's going to put a lot of financial pressure on the producers as they look at that 2022 crop.
Do you think the expectation is that fertilizer pricing will come down as we get into the spring session? Was this a scare that spiked prices higher this fall?
You know, you can always hope the prices come down, but it could be a case of pay me now, pay me later. And if you can have that production, you know, and it's really important to think about who's going to have the most marginal benefit for those pounds of nitrogen that go on. If you think about Iowa and the productive farm grounds that we've got here and the wonderful technology that farmers have put into place to be able to be more efficient, you're going to think about they've got more benefit per pound of nitrogen that goes on than a lot of those other areas, even at the fringes of the Corn Belt. So for Iowa producers, it's really important that they're going to have that access to the fertilizer, because if there's one thing we know, it's a global marketplace, and we need to be the most efficient and effective producers and the most environmentally efficient productive producers of those crops.
That fertilizer supply and price question was on the mind of nearly every grower I talked to, and a lot of folks had different plans to strategize for this spring, with several growers saying they might just roll the dice and rely on the fertility already in their fields.
Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
Greg Solier joins us this week. And Greg, what are you looking for in the week ahead? That Pacific is getting more active.
It certainly is. That big Gulf of Alaska storm on the move, settling to the south and east, and hence kind of a realignment of the upper air pattern where we haven't had this discernible long wave trough into this part of the country. So weather systems will be dropping on in. They'll be getting kicked on out. And when's the last time you saw the weather maps and charts loaded up with moisture, lowering snow levels? Heads up, Big Sky Country people, and into the northern and central plain states areas too, coming off the recent cold, the snow, the melt, and then back to snow. No Arctic air in mind you, but again, the trajectory of the upper air pattern is conducive to keep these moisture makers going early to middle parts of the week. A brief break late in the week here across the Snake River Valley. Organized snows into the western Dakotas, southern Canadian Prairie, and a new weather system comes ashore into the Pacific Northwest. The beat will go on here for the next week to 10 days, and there's a southern reflection to that Gulf of Alaska storm, meeting systems into California. They drop into the desert southwest, they lift to the north and northeast, and here is the story across the plains. Note last week's drought monitor, some worsening where we had improvement of late into Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. Well, here comes the shower and thunderstorm activity, probably heavy and severe, and here come the weather systems coming out of southern California. They'll race into the plain states. This is a strong jet stream pattern and brief break in the wet weather. Later in the week, new moisture for the valleys of California as one weather system across the plains heads north and east into the Corn Belt locales.
Across the central part of the country, Greg, some folks got their first real taste of winter this past week. Does that say we are in a winter pattern now?
For those folks, but it's really just seasonal in nature. Seasonal temperatures. Yeah, we had some of that sub-zero cold and across the Dakotas, the upper Midwest, northern Great Lakes region, and they were down double-digit values below zero last week up across the Canadian Prairie. Well, that cold has eased. Note the warm front. You know, in summertime, we talk of heat wave weather patterns. Do the same thing in December. This is probably near record-setting warmth on the move into the eastern Corn Belt, and this is a complex of weather systems on the move. They'll make their move quickly southwest to northeast with widespread moisture, showers, some thunderstorms as well into the eastern Corn Belt. Cooler to colder air western sections, the Arctic air well to the north, and a new weather system in this trough will form up. Right behind it is a busier weather pattern for the plain states here in the days to come and weeks to come. A couple of systems in the desert southwest down through the Rio Grande, southern part of the winter wheat belt, showers and thunderstorms, and a push of almost late summer, early autumn-like air into the southern plains and lower Mississippi Valley. With that moisture and a pair of cold fronts in this southwest and northeast jet, it'll be an active one with showers and thunderstorms, heavy and severe for December. Lower Mississippi Valley, windy, cooler air on the backside of this weather system. Not done with the moisture in the short term as well, Mike, for the central and southern plains here the next couple of weeks.
Well, what do you see as you turn your eyes farther east, Greg?
Across the Corn Belt locales, it is much like a feel of record warmth and perhaps more like October. It's a heat wave weather pattern in December terms for the eastern Corn Belt. Note the low pressure systems back across the western complex. Will be showers and thunderstorms widespread and probably a shift from rain to snow. Northern Great Lakes region back into the northwestern Corn Belt had some snow last week into parts of Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa. We'll do it all over again. Delightful weather from an outdoor work standpoint, but there's expanding dryness into the northeast and New England. That'll be the story here as we head through the late portion of the week. Southeastern part of the country, high pressure here. We're watching the drought monitor again, drying out over this part of the country. The easterly wind means shower activity for Florida. Watch the lows coming out of Oklahoma and Texas. They're on the move along with these frontal boundaries, and with it, showers and thunderstorms pretty widespread, probably heavy and severe late in the week. Eastern Texas, Delta into the Tennessee Valley with windy, mild weather across the Carolinas and an almost summer feel for the Delta region. Cooler air into the southern plains late in the week.
Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot BioProven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot BioProven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
Greg, there was more activity on your weather charts than we've seen in quite some time. What's the precipitation highlights look like for this next week?
Over the past weeks, we've talked about, kind of mid-December, right before the holidays, the pendulum would begin to swing. And mind you, this is not the way a La Nina setup goes, especially as it applies to the western states. So enjoy it while you may. Typically, La Nina means drier California, the southwest, southern plains. So we'll take it. There'll be some modest drought improvement. And look at it. Some of the higher peaks, you'll melt down the snow, upwards of 6, 7, 8-inch water equivalent, and lots of snow here. Upper Midwest, northern plains, Canadian prairie. Hopefully we can get some of that to melt and percolate out in. Look at the swath of moisture out of the southern plains into the Corn Belt and southeastern states, and we're watching some expanding dryness issues, drought issues again, parts of the plains and southeastern part of the country. And yeah, it's December, but there's severe weather. We'll keep an eye on that for parts of Oklahoma, Tennessee Valley, points on southward later in the week. Some of that moisture heading into the northeast and New England.
Greg, Christmas week, does it look like it's going to be a good week for travel?
From a comfort standpoint, from a temperature standpoint, there's no real Arctic air in sight. So the way these oil and gas prices are, a few more pennies in your back pocket with this warmth, December style like heat wave weather pattern. If it were summertime, we'd be forecasting 100-degree heat into the Corn Belt. The winter solstice, by the way, on the 21st, 9:59 in the morning Central Time Zone. We've got some cooler air across the western part of the country, the warmth into the eastern part of the country, and note that southwest and northeast jet stream pattern. So there's more moisture ahead, at least in the medium range. California, look at the swath of busyness, including probably some snow for Santa, for the upper Midwest areas, drying out over the eastern states and down through the Florida Panhandle.
How about New Year's week, Greg? Are we going to start 2022 off nicely?
We see kind of that pattern shift, locking down the cold air on the move. Remember, everything from the Pacific's on the move, so downstream, that will mean here a change in the steering currents, and we get some colder air to lock in through Big Sky country, kind of that cold that we had here last week across the northern parts of the country, the Canadian prairie, the warmth running from the southwestern part of the country into the southeast and the Delta region. And we'll bring in the new year with a pretty busy weather pattern, but now focused to the Pacific Northwest. This will be snow as well, Canadian prairie. This will be snow through the northern and central Corn Belt, northeast of New England. Much needed rainfall over the southeastern part of the country. Precip about normal, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas.
For the week of January 3rd, Greg, do those cold temps march their way south?
They lock in for now. I think we'll get bits and pieces to ebb and flow back and forth, but we think the main mother load, the parent load of the cold, will be right here across the St. Lawrence River Valley, Hudson Bay, James Bay. Systems will kind of run the periphery of the cold. Once in a while, it'll settle southward. Sometimes it builds back to the north. And here's your warmth source, California, Oklahoma, Texas. Normal temperatures over the southeastern part of the country. Note you get a feel that the storm track is getting farther and farther south into the northern and central Rockies now, northern through western Corn Belt locales into the eastern complex, and likely to see snow in this perimeter here, probably snow and ice and mixed moisture. Normal moisture for the central plains, the southeastern part of the country will pick up shower and thunderstorm activity. Again, a little more typical typical trademark of La Nina, drying out for Texas, the Southwest, and back westward into California.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
It's that time of the year, 'tis the season. Show me your heat houser in Max's Tractor Shed, brought to you by Store Lock Tool Cabinets. They have a variety of colors, all right, a variety of drawer arrangements. Oh yes, and you will find the common denominator, how substantial and stable they are. Go to the website, storelock.com, to get all of the information. Well, as the winds of winter start to blow and the snowflakes fly, you need a little bit of protection on that open platform tractor. Get behind some plastic and some canvas, just the way this windbreaker provides on this International Harvester tractor. Now, it may be a cabette, a half cab, a heat houser. This is a windbreaker. This is a tractor at North Liberty, Indiana. Tom McCormick has this great alum of the class of '71. A tractor turned out of the Farmall plant 50 years ago. This 966 has proven itself in a variety of ways. It moves snow. It's been out there doing a number of things out in the field as well. Right in that area, they get a lot of lake effect snows there, not far southwest of South Bend, Indiana. Oh, and Tom was even able to purchase the tractor with the 5-bottom IH plow that came out with that 966, and he has restored it too. And he's also taught his 17-year-old son how to drop it in and plow some rounds with that plow with a 966 tractor and a windbreaker at North Liberty, Indiana. Well, they sell some older equipment and a lot of late model equipment at Big Iron Auctions. Mark Stock joins us right now to give us the weekly report.
Well, Max, we have got auctions every day next week. We'll sell land, livestock, and machinery Monday through Friday. Big machinery sale here on December 15th and 16th, featuring over 4,300 items selling in 2 days. There are 14 retirement and estate auctions on this massive 2-day auction event. Also selling equipment for Heartland Co-op and subsidiaries in Modell, Iowa. 269 items will sell, including a J&M 375 triaxle seed tender. There's a J&M 1151 track grain cart selling. Also, a John Deere 8345 RT track tractor will sell. Charles Stromquist from Longmont, Colorado will sell 26 items, including a Caterpillar 262B skid steer. They've also got a John Deere 7800 two-wheel drive tractor with 5,035 hours. They'll be selling a 2001 Fontaine 48-foot tandem axle drop deck spread axle trailer with extensions. We'll also be conducting our classic car auction on December the 16th. There's over 45 items to choose from, including a 1964 Chevrolet Impala SS 2-door hardtop. There's a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air 4-door sedan. There's also a 1978 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am that's only got 10,700 miles showing. All of this land, livestock, and equipment sells next week on BigIron.com.
The FFA Chapter Tribute is sponsored by Nationwide, the #1 farm insurer in the country. To register your FFA chapter, go to nationwidesupportsffa.com. That's nationwidesupportsffa.com. Nationwide, we stand for you.
We are proud to be getting to know the National Officer Team for this year's FFA, and this week, Courtney Zimmerman, the Central Region Vice President for the National FFA Team, joins us. Courtney, what are you excited about as you look towards the year ahead?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked that question, because I think there's so many things to be excited about within this year. But one thing I'm incredibly excited for is that we get to go out and we get to connect with students one-on-one, whether that's in workshops, state conventions, just meeting them through random events that we may have. But coming from a year that there was so much uncertain and so much canceled and not being able to get in person, I'm so excited to be able to travel across the nation and meet members nationwide and just hear their stories and why they're involved in FFA and why they are excited to be here as well.
Well, let's get your story. What got you involved with FFA in the first place, Courtney?
Yeah, absolutely. So my story in FFA is a little bit different than most because it was pretty natural for me to get involved in FFA. My dad was my local ag ed teacher and FFA advisor, and then my mom was the Wisconsin State FFA executive director. So she got to work with state officers. So that was really exciting growing up in that atmosphere, and I saw my siblings get really involved within FFA and watch them grow through it. So I got to see the benefits of it, and I wanted to be just like them. Now I'm the youngest child in my family, so kind of living up to their standard was kind of what I wanted to do. But I really saw the benefits that it had, and so I dove into FFA, got really involved, found what I loved, and not only was that the leadership aspect and the public speaking parts, but it was also being able to have the opportunity to work on my family's livestock operation with my dad, which I so much enjoyed.
That's fantastic. That blue and gold is in your veins. Courtney, we wish you the best of luck as you continue your service as the Central Region Vice President.
Thank you so much.
Now, Samuelson Says. Insight and commentary from Orion Samuelson.
It was an eventful week for me because I lost some friends. I guess that happens when you begin to add maturity to your calendar. One of my friends, well known, one not so well known, except his neighbors knew who he was and what he did. But then there was Senator Bob Dole, candidate for the U.S. president 3 different times, never made it. I think we'd have had a better country had he made it to the presidency. But I had the opportunity to meet Bob Dole and interview him several times. And before we started the interview, he would always say, "How's the wheat crop in Kansas?" That was his home state. And he was always interested in agriculture, was active in writing agricultural policy, but perhaps had the greatest effect on people who had some difficulty in getting around. He worked hard on the American Disability Act, and you and I see that every time we go to office buildings or to national parks. So Bob Dole probably could have made a difference in the politics of this country, and I will miss the opportunity to stop by his office whenever I'm in Washington, because he would always have the door open and invite me in to talk about whatever subjects I wanted to cover. So good memories of Bob Dole, good memories of my other friend, and all I wish is in this time that you be good, be safe, be careful. My thoughts on Samuelson Says.
Farmers are gathering in person, and later in the program we'll have an update from the Iowa Farm Bureau's annual meeting held in Des Moines earlier this week. One of the great things about agriculture in my mind is meeting season. It's getting together with everybody, collecting stories and sharing tales with people in our industry. At the Iowa Farm Bureau Convention earlier this week, I spoke with Jacob Hanson. He's a farmer and businessman from north central Iowa, and I asked him, how would you describe 2021?
Challenging would definitely be a word, but another word would be rewarding. Better than expected yields. Everybody you talk to is saying we're probably better than what we deserve, or better than what the weather looked like it would be. Kids are back in school. Kids always had been in school in our area. My wife's a teacher, and things are staying busy on the home front, and the businesses as well, and farm, and kind of everything. It's been a lot of good work for a lot of good people.
And you mentioned the businesses. You are also an excavator. You run an excavating company. Jacob, what has the demand been like throughout 2021 for excavation needs in Iowa?
It's been very busy, all over the board, from home building to agricultural products to bins that needed to be replaced and buildings that needed to be replaced from our derecho last year. And then the uptick in a little cash flow was a great thing for the local farm community. So guys are kind of catching up, from the tiling projects to, we had a great project this year partnering with local agencies where we did a bunch of bioreactors and saturated buffers, water quality, 52 projects in Polk County. So it's been all over the board, and it's all been very busy and lots of work. And
that's fantastic. On the water quality front, you mentioned the work you've been doing. Are you seeing that continue to accelerate?
It is purpose-driven and homegrown demand for this stuff, and knowing that farmers want to do the right thing, and landowners want to push their tenants to do the right thing, and partnerships through NRCS and USDA, the local IDOLs. Everybody's kind of moving the needle in the right direction, and we're all going great guns at it and doing a lot of progress on it.
And you also do some tiling, and I understand this year has probably been a pretty busy year for tiling, as it's a great way to add value to ground.
It is. It's the most best returning investment the guy can make on the ground. It's going to return 24/7, 365 for as long as you own that farm. And the tiling demand has been outstanding this year from guys that have been, 2008 guys really started to see the benefits of tile with some extra cash to spend, and they're back in the same boat. We're making those fields better, creating that sponge, being able to work hand in hand with the water quality projects that catch the runoff from those farms and treat that water and send it downstream, and also add value to the farmer on the tiling aspect with easier farms and better producing farms.
Jacob discussed how he was cautiously optimistic as he looked ahead to the 2020 season, but input costs remain a top concern. We'll continue to bring you updates on input costs and everything else related to agriculture right here on This Week in Agribusiness. So until next time, have a great week, everybody.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.